Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs, no we don't do dinosaurs.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 48. I'm your host, Sarah, with my co-host today, Jeb Card. And today we're talking to Chris Begley. We're going to talk about Ciudad Blanca today, also known in the media as the lost city of the Monkey King. We're going to talk about the history of this area and how recent discoveries using LiDar have brought attention back to the mythical city. Get ready to think critically.
You will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I'm here with Jeb today. Jeb, how's it going?
Doing all right. It is definitely summer outside between the rain and the humidity and the heat.
True that. And today we have special guest Chris Begley with us. How's it going, Chris?
It's going fine.
Now, Chris, you are in Kentucky, right?
That's right. I'm in Lexington.
Are you teaching there?
Well, not at the moment, but yeah, I teach here at Transylvania University.
That's awesome that there's a Transylvania University.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the right place for this show, perhaps. In fact, it's the 16th oldest university in the country.
Oh, nice. Wow. I'm from the Midwest. You would think I would know that, but no, I don't. So there's that.
Well, it's true.
I believe you. So whereabouts is Transylvania? Is it like close to the Indiana border, or?
No, it's right in downtown Lexington. Lexington is right in the center of.
Oh, there we go.
Central Kentucky.
There you go. Okay, so it's right smack dab in the middle.
It's one of the few, liberal arts colleges that's actually in a city.
Yeah.
So what do you teach when you are teaching?
Well, if you teach at a small liberal arts college, you typically like to teach broadly. So I teach archaeological classes, some of which are sort of specific, like Latin American prehistory or maritime archaeology, but also teach a lot of classes that are much broader, sustainable development class, an Appalachian sort of cultural history class.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And all of these relate to, other things I've done or sort of my background, because I'm actually from Kentucky.
Okay, so I first met you 18 years ago, or whatever it was, 19 years ago, in 1997. You, at the time, were working in Honduras. That was where a lot of your work was, but you were working on a project in El Salvador, and I was working on a project in El Salvador. And we were digging up a pyramid. And I remember talking with you. We'd go to like Cantina across the way from where we were staying, blah, blah, about your work. And you were working in an area called the Mosquitia. And that's often, like, I see people characterize it as jungle. Is it forest, or is that mostly swamp, or what are we talking about? Wetlands, or?
Yeah, it depends. It has all of that stuff. And of course, now it has a lot of pasture and things like that too, of course. But principally, the area that I work there is rainforested.
Okay.
There's an area closer to the coast, a little further south and east from where most of my work is savanna, swampy areas, and that appears to be a different culture area in the past. I mean, if you want to use those terms, it's just material, in terms of material culture, it's pretty distinct.
And is that still in modern day Honduras, or is that because this area extends into Nicaragua, right?
Yeah, I think typically the the definition of the Mosquiteo or the Mosquito Coast is sort of a coastal area, but extending back, 100 miles or so from the coast in eastern Honduras and Nicaragua.
Okay. So you were doing your research, and you were telling me, like, you were seeing these sites and doing all these things in like some pretty rough terrain, and I think we'll talk more about that. And you were describing them, and you were saying things like, and again, I distinctly remember this. If nothing else, I was like, well, I got like oral examinations coming up. I should know about this. Never mind, anything else. You've got like, low mounds and things that you were looking at as possibly being related to the Mesoamerican ball game, so possible ball courts. And then there was one particular thing I remember, and that was, you're like, yeah, and there are metates, these grinding stones, these basaltic or otherwise ground stones. So they're not chipped, they're ground down, they're eroded down. Typical part of sort of the kind of cultural material in Mesoamerica and Central America. In Central America, they can often get kind of ornate. And you're like, they're all over the surface. They're everywhere. So I remember that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they are everywhere.
Yeah. I remember.
Yeah, in this area we have, it's earthen mounds, most of which are low, but there's pretty tall ones. 10-meter.
Oh wow. Okay.
High mounds. So there are some that are large in the larger sites.
Yeah.
And there are many that are just massive in other ways. They might be 6 or 8 meters tall, but maybe they're 75
very wide,
meters long.
Wow. Okay.
And long, and just running sort of the length of these sites. And we have ball courts, or what I think, and others. Susan Gillespie, Dave Grove, people that know about these sorts of things.
These
as
are
well.
big names in Mesoamerican archaeology.
Yeah, the ball courts are, they're structures for a ball game, typically, I guess, but they're also ritually important structures, we think. And
ball games are big in like a number of origin stories in Mesoamerica, so it wouldn't be surprising that an important sacred place might look like a ball court.
That's right. What was surprising here, though, is that everything indicates that this really is sort of outside of Mesoamerica.
Right.
In fact, all of the material culture looks like the folks were related much more to what you'd find further south in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. And
this whole area starts to get, and we can talk more about this later, the whole concept of borders and boundaries and definitions and inside-outside. So the reason I bring this up, though, is that starting around 2012, 2013, and definitely in 2015, I started to hear, these rumblings of, there have been new things found in this area and all this. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting, but I'm a little cautious. And then in 2015, these pictures started to show up of low mounds in the forest, and they were freaking out because, like, look at this coming out of the ground. And I'm looking at it going, that's a carved metate. And so is that. And this is sounding really friggin' familiar right now, actually. But the big thing, of course, they were not like saying, oh, this is, just site 300X. It's like, these might be the Ciudad Blanca. So when I say that, what the hell is that? Now, I knew what it was, both from discussing it with you, and I actually was aware of it a little beforehand. But why was that such a big deal? Why was such a big deal made of this? When I say those words, what is that?
Well, in this area, there's a pervasive legend of a lost city, and there are many versions of it, and to some degree, it seems to be sort of an El Dorado type myth, at least in the sort of later versions. But we've identified many different versions. There are indigenous versions, ones that may, in fact, have some similarity to myths that might have been told hundreds of years ago.
Okay.
But at any rate, this myth of this lost city, of the White City or the Ciudad Blanca, is pervasive in the area. Hondurans all over the country know it. In fact, when I started working in the area, one of the first things people would ask is, "Oh, you're looking for the lost city?" And of course, I would say, "Well, not exactly. We're looking for really anything, everything."
And you get that in a lot of places where people are like, "Are you looking for gold? Are you looking for this?" And that's not easy. Now, you called this an El Dorado style story. I don't know if we've covered on the show the whole El Dorado. We're not going to get into it. That could be its own thing.
Yeah,
But basically, the way I understand El Dorado kind of stories is that you have it in a number of different places in the Spanish sort of colonial process. These stories emerge of just over the border, just across the frontier, there will be a city full of gold and riches. And I've even heard these described as potentially sort of a kind of psychological warfare. It's like, oh, look, we have been living here for thousands and thousands of years, and these invaders have showed up and they want everything, and they're just stealing. What if we told them that thing they're looking for is like just one valley the hell away from here, and maybe they'll go. Is that kind of what you mean by an El Dorado story?
Well, those are all elements of the El Dorado story. What the parts of it that are salient here are the fact that it's a city full of gold or treasure.
Yeah, plates made of gold, if I remember correctly.
That's that kind of thing, for instance. Yeah. Yes, and it started early on with the Spanish, the Spanish folks that were in Honduras and writing back about what they'd seen and whether they were trying to impress somebody, or they were recounting stories they'd heard, or they were making things up whole cloth. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah. But there's some interesting things about that, and I think this is pretty important to my whole take on the story. I lived and worked principally with the Pesh, and the Pesh is one of the indigenous groups in Honduras, and I lived in one of their villages, and most of the guys that I worked with were Pesh. And when we would go out into the forest to do these projects, and we would go out for 2 or 3 weeks, I would go with them, and they knew these areas. They knew these areas that were 5, 6, 7 days walk from where we were. I mean, it was just astounding. They knew everything. Everywhere we were, they would say, "Oh, if we go up to this next creek and up, we'll see this."
Yeah.
If you
so
want
this
to
is not like, oh my God, one more machete chop and the horizon will open up and there'll be, pyramids and towers and all these things that have never before been seen by human or white often eyes. Yeah. Like that kind of
well,
thing.
That's part of some of these stories.
Yes, it's part of the stories, yes.
Yeah, but the area in general, and I think one of us realize when you live and work there for an extended period of time and really know people and know how things work, is that, people go everywhere. And that what seems remote and impossible to get to for me is the kind of thing that people do all the time. And, in fact, I would get that from other archaeologists about some of the stuff I would do. They'd be like, "How did you get there?" And it's like, "Well, we walked." And they're like, "Well, look how far it is." And I was like, "I know, it took a week." But,
That's awesome.
But
I was there, I remember.
But you just keep walking, And of course, what takes me a week probably takes them 3 days, right? So one of the things I discovered there was that the Pesh version of the legend, in Pesh, they call it Kau Kamasa. And that's the words that were translated for me as White City.
Okay.
And we were...
Which is Ciudad Blanca for our non-Spanish speakers.
Oh, yeah. Which is Ciudad. It was translated to me as Ciudad Blanca.
Yes.
And, so I just assumed... I knew that Kamasa meant white or pale because that's what they called me. But the cow, I didn't know what that meant. But anyway, we once were out in the forest and we were camped out. And one of the guys I was with, Cipriano, asked me finally if I'd heard of this myth of the Kau Kamasa, or the Ciudad Blanca. And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of it. I'd worked with him for a long time, but I hadn't brought it up because I didn't want to be seen as a treasure hunter."
Yeah.
And
which, as we're going to get into, there's a history there.
Oh yeah, there's a long history of that sort of stuff. And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of it." And he said, "Well, it's right up here. We just go up this creek and it's up there." And I said, "Okay." And of course, I'm trying to not, act like I'm not particularly excited.
Right.
And I said, "Well, should we go look at it?" And he said, "No, we can't." And I thought, well, yeah, of course we can't. But but I asked him why we couldn't, and he said, well, because this is where, when the Spanish came, the gods fled from each of the indigenous groups, 7 indigenous groups. 2 of those are post-contact formed groups, the Mosquito and Garifuna. So, there's a breakdown a little bit in the story, but
colonial transformations.
Yeah, but he said, so if you go there and you don't speak the 7 indigenous languages, you'll make these deities mad, and they won't let you leave. So I asked him if he had been there and seen it. Then he looked at me, like I just had not heard anything he just said, and said, no, or I would still be there. Like, thinking like, God, this is what we've got to work with, and so at any rate, later when I was writing my dissertation, I was back home in Chicago, I guess, and I was writing, and I was translating a little more officially some of the stuff, and I discovered that cow, the Pesh word I didn't know, did not mean city at all. It meant house.
The White
And
House.
that was much more consistent with the things I'd actually seen in the area that he was indicating, because I'd actually been through there before and didn't see any large sites. But, there's small sites all over the place. Yeah. And it occurred to me that what they're talking about, and probably what the indigenous myths were all about, really had nothing to do with city and gold and treasure and the kinds of things that are important in a colonial context or a modern context, but rather a place that is important historically, and the place that he was indicating I knew to be one of the last places that the Pesh lived before they were sort of displaced and brought sort of fully into the modern nation state. So you can imagine that this place represented not only some sort of lost city or the White House, but also sort of the lost autonomy,
a place of refuge,
glory
like
days.
Yeah, a memory of independence.
Exactly. And it occurred to me that I had no idea what I was looking for. And when Cipriano told me, you can't go see the White City if you don't speak the languages, is exactly right. Because if you don't even know what you're looking for. Yeah.
It's like you can go there. There's a thing. It's a thing on the ground, and it's interesting, but it's not the White City or the White House.
It will be meaningful. It will be meaningless to you without the proper context. And so, part of what was very clear, and is very clear when I talked to many, many people about this legend later on, was that it's a very poignant and very important story. And to see it, in many cases over the last century, reduced to sort of this treasure hunt, is what's disturbing, and it makes me mad.
That's actually, it's really funny you say that. I was talking to actually one of our former guests, Sharon Hill, and I was talking back and forth, and we were talking about sort of the difference between these things, and I kind of came up with this little parable about different kinds of sort of visions. Our ideas of things that are horror about the past, and things about science fiction are the new, and how fantasy is often and sort of the fantastic is often a grieving for the lost. It's often a grieving for what we've lost. The big one is example would be like Tolkien with his our mythic past that we know doesn't exist in his version, but it's still a reflection of Weber and disenchantment and all that. And the paranormal, and I would throw in conspiracy theory and paranormalism and alternative archaeologies and all sorts of these things, is often a refusal to accept that loss. And in doing so, the reason I mentioned this is we were looking at this article that she had posted on Facebook about these ghost hunters, these ghost hunter people, and they were finding ghosts in, tiny little weird recordings and like blips on like a Kinect video game thing that they were sweeping around a room. And at some point it's just like, you've taken this idea of literally the human soul surviving death or all these other things, and you've turned it into something really freaking small. And that's kind of what you're describing here, is this very poignant story about resilience and independence and all of that. And it's turned into I get to sweep that machete through a thing and find, a bullshit story. And just to satisfy myself. And it does. It turns this thing very small. It's really funny when one other thing I was going to say earlier, you mentioned the everybody knows things. Like everybody, you live a place, you get places, people go places. Possibly one of my least favorite moments in all of cinema is in the serious ass bullshit movie Apocalypto. And I think I've talked about my hatred of this movie on the show before, but I will now. And there is this scene where these people from the city, this Maya city, have captured some. I mean, they're basically Ewoks, but they're people. These noble savages in the countryside, and they're dragging these people like, I think, a couple of days march. They never make it clear, but a couple of days walk. And at one point they go, and by the way, they're all speaking the same Maya language. And I think some of the villagers even have like tattoos of hieroglyphs on them. And they go, where are they taking us? Where are they taking us? And the answer is, it's a place of big stones. And the guy's like baffled by this, and I'm like, you assholes! This would be like making Braveheart and having like the William Wallace character. It's like, what is that place down there? This York place. It's like, it's a place of large stone houses, the likes of. You would never treat white people like this.
Well, yeah.
There you go.
It's 2 days of walking.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot to us. It's not. I mean, that's like, we've walked back 2 days because we forgot something.
Yeah.
And or once I walked back 2 days to leave somebody back because he wasn't keeping up. But
well, some people are worth walking 2 days.
Yeah.
We'll say that. Let's take our break, and afterwards, let's actually talk about some of the conditions in there, some of the kind of work that you've done there, some of the survey work you've done, because I think that will then kind of lead nicely into some of the stuff you've done there, some of the stuff that other people have done there, both in the past and in the present.
Okay.
So let's take a break on that. All right.
Soupcast is just the audio from select episodes at the YouTube channel of Archaeosoup Productions. Mr. Soup brings you a clear understanding of the past in order to truly understand the world around us. Check out Soupcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Soupcast. Now let's get back to the show.
Are you ready to launch your career to new heights? Visit careers.dish.com/technician now and uncover a world of exciting opportunities waiting just for you. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, Dish has everything you need to thrive. Don't wait any longer to kickstart your next opportunity. Apply today and join the Dish family, where innovation meets opportunity. Visit us online at careers.dish.com/technician. Your future starts now.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
And we are back, and we are still talking with Chris Begley. So, Jeb wants to ask you one more question, and then I want to get into this Jungle Land thing that you were involved with.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, my question is basically, so you said you've been in there, and we were talking about, that, 2 days walk is just, one does not simply walk into the mosquito. Actually, you totally do. That's exactly what you do. So, I mean, you were mentioning survey, and maybe sort of talk about, like, how you were organizing that, but then basically, what's it like going there?
Yeah, well, first, I'll just tell you the story. I was, I'd been working in Bolivia and decided I did not want to work up in the Andes. I mean, nothing wrong with the Andes. And many good people work there. However,
it's just not
I
for
wanted
you.
to work in the lowlands. And an archaeologist, at a party somewhere mentioned that I might want to talk with the people at the Institute of Anthropology in Honduras because they were looking for somebody that was interested in working in the Mosquitia, because they were interested in sort of filling in the gaps in their archaeological knowledge of their country. And this was an area that, while it was not unknown, it had seen very little work compared to some
There was a
other
little
areas.
work, but not a lot.
It was a little work, not a lot. But it was very good and comprehensive work. And I remember after going there and doing a lot of work, sort of coming up with the same conclusions that Doris Stone came up with after, riding a mule through there for a week in 1940. So that was a little humbling, but I went out there, and that's where I did the bulk of the work for my master's and dissertation. And I did sort of a typical thing that archaeologists do, a regional survey and testing program, where I surveyed, which is the term we use for finding archaeological sites. And some of it I did systematically, some of it I did 100% coverage of an area, some I did, systematic coverage, and then some I did sort of targets of opportunity. But but one thing that we did, which really set the trajectory for me, and continues to be one of the things I always do, is at the suggestion of George Haseman, which is really the archaeologist, an American that lived in Honduras, and his career was also there. He came up, I guess, with this idea, or at least sort of made it formal like this, of approaching any new area by doing what he called key site surveys, which really meant going around and talking to everybody. And we went from village to village to village to town to village, and we talked to the mayors and the farmers and, everybody anybody that would talk to us. We held community meetings where the whole community would gather around, and we would tell them what we wanted to do. We were looking for archaeological sites. We wanted to map them. And we wanted to learn about the past. And people would show us stuff, and they would take us to see things. And one of the things I realized is that unless something is very insignificant that people have just not noticed because it's not particularly notable, they know everything. They know where every site is. And it's not just one person that knows it. I would hear again and again, okay, if you had a lot of time, if we could go for a week, we could go out here in the forest and we would see this and this, and, and they were describing these sites that I later saw or mapped or whatever. And so that's what I did. Basically, using all of these techniques, we got an idea of how people were spread across the landscape. And then from there, we excavated in, at a variety of sites. At several sites, we would do just some very basic small test excavations. And then at fewer sites, we would do larger scale, et cetera, until the money ran out. Yeah. And
this is all pretty standard archaeological sort of project design. I mean, there's some cool things you're doing that not all projects do, but it's not like you're going out and doing anything ridiculous or crazy. I mean, this is solid work. Yeah,
I was interested in getting a doctorate.
Yeah,
and that pretty much entailed following some rules.
Right. Now, when you're doing this work, you're talking about like you probably drove. I know you drove some places. I've seen the red truck.
Oh yeah.
But I'm confusing with a different one. The old green truck. But not everywhere. Like some of this you're walking. Some of this is involving mules.
Yeah, absolutely. Some, the bulk of the work that I did, especially where I needed to go excavate and I needed a larger crew, we tried to do where we could drive. Mm-hmm. And that way we could come back home to the same village every night.
Yeah.
We didn't always make it back, but, but we, it was close. And it was kind of frustrating. I mean, I'm from Kentucky and I have in fact, sitting here looking around in my driveway, there are 3 4-wheel drive vehicles, and I like driving in the mud and all of that stuff. But God, I'll tell you, at some point, you're just sick of it, and you're sick of getting stuck. And it's like, I'm learning a lot about my truck. I'm learning a lot about how to drive in this stuff. And
here's a little confession. When I talk about survey in my introduction to archaeology, I talk about how a lot of archaeologists do survey, get to know their truck just as well as they get to know other parts of science. I put a picture up. It's you and Roberto Gallardo looking over your truck.
Yeah,
for real.
Yeah, I am. That's embarrassing. I love trucks.
No, it's a good thing.
I guess it's good for this. It's a little lowbrow taste, I suppose. But when I come back, my wife is like, "You've taken pictures of trucks and buildings, like from any trip. Where are the people?"
Hey man, you know what you like. That's all that you need to know.
Okay, well, next time I'll take people. But
if it makes you feel better, I take pictures of buildings and museums and weird shit. I don't take pictures of people either. So we deal with people professionally. We don't need to deal with that shit on our free time.
Yeah. Well.
You know what? That's exactly what I'm encouraging people to do with this show, though.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Well, we're all working on ourselves. Yes, in some places I would try to get it where we could drive. In other places we would go further out. But when we were going out, say in the forest, we might be gone for 3 weeks and we might record 10 sites, I don't know, something like that, maybe 10, 15 sites. Whereas if we're doing survey where we can drive, it's just much, it's you do a lot more. And so, so there's that. But eventually I recognized that there's some value in doing work in these really remote areas, because a lot of the sites, while they are well known to local folks and while they've been picked over and moved around, it's not to the degree that they have been when there's a road next to them.
Yeah.
So you get lots of these stone sculptures that you talked about before.
Yeah.
That are still in situ. If you go to an archaeological site that is next to a village or next to a road, all of those artifacts are gone. Yeah. People take them back to their houses because they're cool, or they sell them perhaps, or who knows what happens.
Yeah.
If you're faced with walking, 5 days back carrying this 150-pound stone sculpture, it's got to be really compelling.
Yeah.
And there has to be no easier way to do it. And, so far there's just been an easier way to do it.
Yeah.
So you would find things. And this might be what you're thinking about from our initial conversations, or, pictures I might have showed you where you have these sites that are covered with small grinding stones or metates or large grinding stones or other kinds of stone sculpture. In fact, the area is really known sort of for its stone sculpture as kind of the artifact that will impress people. The pottery is pretty plain.
Yeah.
The architecture is earthen mounds with, maybe cobbles on it, but not cut stone, not something that looks like one of these great Mayan sites.
Well, like in the 30s and 40s, was it Herbert Spindon and Duncan Strong? They were pulling those metates out, like you said, these metates and a few other stone things. They were the sort of the. What's a picture from this area got? It's got these things.
But,
every old report is full of stone sculpture.
But I'm curious, were you able to excavate at any of these sites, or were you just doing like a walkover?
Well, it depends. I excavated at about a dozen sites to some degree, and then we did shovel probes, which is a form of excavation, I suppose, but a little different, at maybe another 2 or 3 dozen sites.
Yeah,
But you were never able to like scrape the dirt all the way down to sub or anything.
Oh yeah, no, we did that.
Okay.
About a dozen of those.
That's a pretty formidable digging project in addition to a bunch of survey.
Oh no, I can imagine that it's probably. I can imagine the problems of not only getting your gear and your people out there, but then getting everything home. I just was wondering if maybe it was too much of a barrier, and it's just they've never been excavated.
It is in some senses, and partly that's why I chose to do as much as I could in these areas that were closer to the road. And then we would do some that was further afield. But really, the further we got out, the less sort of excavation I would do. But partly because, as an archaeologist, we're scientists, and so we approach these things using the scientific method ostensibly, where you have research questions and reasons to do things.
Right.
Gold plates is not enough, Chris? That's a joke.
So one of the things is that, as archaeologists, we ostensibly are operating under the scientific method where we have reasons to do what we're doing. We have research questions or we have hypotheses. And we try to disturb things as little as possible, and often I just didn't need to answer the kinds of questions I was interested in asking.
Well, that's good to know. Because a lot of people think that you have to dig in order to answer questions. A lot of people don't understand the reason and the reward of just a walkover survey or a phase 1 or possibly even a very limited phase 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I want to see the the site layout, excavation is probably not going to help me. I'm not going to excavate enough to.
Yeah, you got to map it first either way.
That's going to be something you do from mapping, which is pretty low impact.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the distribution across a landscape, and that, of course, is just plotting them on a map. Or I'm interested in what time period they represent, and in most places, you have some way to find things on the surface that allow you to tell those.
Yeah.
To tell that. And so excavating would be, I excavated for reasons like, if these are ball courts, are there ball court markers in the center?
Right.
Gotcha.
How are these things constructed? Are these mounds that are built in one episode, or do they represent several layers of, of rebuilding, etc.?
Right.
And so you had a whole bunch of sophisticated questions about culture, and this being the show that it is, we're going to elide past them a little bit. No,
we don't actually care about that. Sorry.
No, we do.
Yeah.
We actually do, and I do want to see if we can shove some more in a little later. But what I did want to ask you about, so you did this work, you became known as one of the archaeologists that works in this area, and that kind of led to some other sorts of work there. And in particular, you got sort of brought on to kind of bring a journalist in there who was interested in one of the stories surrounding this whole White City, Ciudad Blanca legend. And could you tell us about that?
Yeah, starting back in the mid-'90s when the internet sort of really became the internet, there was a community that was interested in these stories, and there were people that were posting things that they'd found or they'd researched in ways that you really hadn't seen before. And somebody uncovered the story of Theodore Mord, who was a sort of an adventurer, I guess. I mean, he wasn't a scientist. He was just a guy, I guess, that in 1939 or 40 went to Honduras to do a variety of things, but ended up claiming that he had found this lost city. Now, he didn't use the term Ciudad Blanca or any of the other familiar terms. He called it the lost city of the monkey god, which had nothing to do with anything.
Which had been made up by somebody by the name of a Captain Stuart Murray, or there were several of these guys.
Yeah.
Well, this is the 1930s. This was King Kong, and this was all of these other things that that you could probably connect to some of this.
And you can find the moored article online. You can find images from it. Those images, and you just mentioned King Kong. That's why I break in and mention it. They are so clearly, they were done by Virgil Finlay, who was a famous pulp illustrator at the time. And it is clearly some King Kong going on there.
Well, yeah, it sure is. And, what happened with this book is, I had written about the Lost City legend, and was interested in it for all the reasons that you're interested in talking about it today, I think. Mm-hmm. And I got a call from Christopher Stewart, who was the journalist, the writer, who ended up writing Jungle Land. And he said he'd heard this story and he wanted to write about it. He wanted to talk to me. I remember I talked to him for a bit, and then I went back in and I told my wife. My wife, by the way, is Honduran, and so she knows all of this. She grew up in the Mosquitia, partly, and she and I said, he wants to write this book about the Lost City, but I was kind of interested in writing a book about that. And she looked at me and said, "Well, are you writing it?" And I said, "Well, no, not yet."
How's that book you're working on going?
Yeah, right.
And she said, "And is that it? That's all you got? That's your thing? And if somebody else writes about it, you've got nothing." I'm like, "No." She's like, "Well, what's the issue?" And I'm like, "You're right. There's no issue." So, I sent him everything I'd written, everything I'd ever uncovered about it, all the newspaper articles where it had been found every 10 years or so for the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Atlantis, it keeps getting found.
Yeah, people are always finding the Lost City. And I think that, they're missing the point that the key to the Lost City is the lost. They think the key is the city. It's not.
Yeah.
That's relatively unimportant. And so I sent him all this stuff, and he wrote back and said, "Hey, would you like to go to Honduras with me?" And he wanted to follow the footsteps of Mord and see if we could figure out what he might have seen. Although I already sort of had a sense that if there was any really big site that he had seen, it pretty much had to be this one, which was everybody's lost city up until about the 1980s, when people moved into it and built a school in the plaza, and that just kind of ruins your lost city, when like there's school kids playing soccer and
again, no lianas to cut with a machete. It's just not fun anymore.
Yeah, it just doesn't make you look very cool to show up at the village.
I think if you showed up in a children's playground with machetes, there might be more problems than not having a city.
That's a whole other kind of problem.
Yeah.
Let's take our break. And when we come back, we'll talk about that you went in there with Stuart and what you found, and then what some other folks have been recently finding there.
Women in Archaeology is a show about archaeology by the women of archaeology. An alternating panel of women archaeologists discuss the issues in archaeology that impact professionals and the public every day. Check out Women in Archaeology for a different perspective on the past today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/WIA. Now let's get back to the show.
Did I hear you're shopping for a car? Because I've been at it for ages. Ugh, such a time suck, right?
Not really. I bought it on Carvana. Super convenient.
Oh, then comes all the financing, research. Am I right?
Well, you can, but I got pre-qualified for a Carvana auto loan in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, but then all the number crunching and terms, right?
Nope. I saw real numbers as I shopped, found my dream car, and got it in a couple of days.
Wait, like you already have it?
Yep.
Oh.
Go to Carvana.com to finance your car the convenient way.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
And we are back, and we are still talking with Chris Begley, and he is going to tell us all about the wonderful adventure he had looking for Ciudad Blanca with Christopher Stewart. And I know I butchered that, and I apologize.
That's all right.
Well, yeah. So, at any rate, the idea was to follow the footsteps of Theodore Moore, this adventurer who was in there in 1940, and to sort of see what we could see, but also to travel around and ask people about the legend. What do you know about it? And ended up also being about sort of why are you living out here on the edge of the rainforest?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things we discovered that people that were not indigenous that had moved out there, it was all because of violence. Every single person we talked to was out there to flee violence in some other part.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't because crops were failing in southern Honduras. It was because it was
larger social problems.
Yeah, it was violence. And at any rate, we talked a lot about this legend, but we followed Moore's footsteps, to the degree that we could. And we had a copy of his diary, and we had some other things that might suggest where he was and how long he had between this period and that period. And really the only large site that he could have made it up to at that point was one called Las Crucitas, which everybody talks about as one of the largest sites out in that part of Honduras. And it's the site that was everybody's Ciudad Blanca, before it became a village.
Right.
But yeah, we traveled, through the rainforest, but mainly we were traveling, from village to village or settlement to settlement. And, it was about a month-long journey. And, Jungle Land, is really, looking back on it, that's a book I could have never written, and it captures things that I wouldn't have thought to write about, or I wouldn't have seen, because I'd been doing it for 20 years at that point.
I mean, it's very much a travel log, and I don't want to give away like the ending and all. I mean, we sort of are in a sense, but like
it's been out for a while. It's okay.
Yeah, but I mean more from like because it's a fun, like I like the ending best. Like the ending's really like the nice punch there. But no, Stuart is very much the outsider, and you clearly are the main character. I mean, you are the main character. You are not like the credited author, but like you're a big part of that story. Yes. And it starts with like a coated walking stick, and it ends here.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these things. But yeah, it is very much an outsider, and you loom occasionally as this slightly like, I don't know what's about this guy. Like he's not entirely trusting you at points. I mean, he is, but like, and maybe he's playing up for drama, but sort of like a, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? And you're the crazy, like, motherfucker who's going to take him into the,
that's what he hired me to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, hired as if one got paid, but that was. I suggested to him that we ought to have like a split column article where he would write his version of what happened on one side, and I would write my version on the other, because his was always dramatic, and he was always thinking, "Oh my God, you're going to die," and I'm like, "What am I doing that you think is going to kill me?" Like at the end, there was this little cave, and I just wanted to go in, and see it, and it was tight to get into. And he's like, "What if you get stuck?" And I'm like, "Well, you're standing right there. I hope to God you'll pull me out." I mean, like it's not like I'm by myself here. And in one other instance there, which I think is a really funny part of the book, we're walking, and it's an area that has there's been a lot of clearing, so it's pasture, so it's sunny and it's hot, and we're walking alongside this river, and we're trying to get to this camp, or this place that Moore had camped in 1940, and it's at the confluence of the river that we're walking along and the next river down. You can't really miss it. And I come down with some kind of fever, which if you've worked in the tropics like this, you know that sometimes you'll just get these fevers for a day or two.
Mm.
And I knew that I was going to overheat and it was going to be bad. And so I said, well, I'm just going to get in the river. I'll just swim down the river and I'll meet you at that, down there, which seemed eminently reasonable. And
okay, I have to admit, that would be a little weird if my guide told me he was going to do that.
Well, if I was the only guide, but we also had another guy, a local guy with a mule.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't leaving him stranded.
You'd be like, hey, dude, you just keep walking straight. I'm going to swim down the river.
But I got to think he's thinking like the sun's melted his brain.
Probably.
He's going to walk open-armed into the river, and I'll never see him again.
Well, the problem was that the guy with the mule said, well, don't get in that river, there are crocodiles. And I'm used to there being crocodiles in these rivers.
Yeah.
But almost everywhere I've worked, the crocodiles are relatively small.
Yeah.
And so they're, 3-4 feet long or whatever. They're not posing any threat. Ones that get bigger end up getting killed, and so...
they're not that big.
So that I was thinking they're not that big. But really what I was thinking was, even if they are that big, I'm going to die out here in the sun. And I'm not probably going to die in that river.
Yeah.
Chances are I'm going to make it down there. But yeah, they, at any rate, I made it. And later discovered that crocodiles there were actually bigger than I would want to encounter. But, it didn't happen. And so one of the things that Chris Stewart really captures in that book is, how a lot of this seems initially, when you've not done it, over and over and over and over. So it's nice.
Yeah. So you were in there, and you do. We've talked about it a little, but there is an ending to that story, and like I said, the payoff on it in that book, and the book's called Jungle Land, and that's 2013. You can find that out there. But it's around 2013 that some other voices started to pop up with, initially, they were saying that they were using super high tech to find something else, or, possibly Ciudad Blanca. So can you tell us a little bit about what that tech is? It's called LiDar. And I know what it is, but I've never worked with it directly. So basically, what is that?
Oh, well, LiDAR is a fantastic technology. It's essentially it works by sending millions of pulses of lasers from the machine to whatever it is that you're interested in mapping, essentially. Yeah. And they bounce back, and you calculate time and all of that, and then you can find distance and angle, and you can create, a map, a 3D map of whatever you pointed at. I've used LiDAR.
It's basically a 3D scanner.
Caves. It's a 3D scanner using lasers. And
but the really cool thing about LiDAR is it ignores ground cover, or it can be set to ignore ground cover, because I've seen LiDAR of the Serpent Mound out in Ohio.
Yes.
And it's just the mound. There's no tree, and there's shadows where there should be trees, but there's no trees.
Yes. Yeah. I think we'd actually lost you briefly there, but we were actually describing LiDAR, so it's all right.
That was well timed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me. So LiDAR, I've used it in caves. I've used it in a couple of other situations. But the use that we're talking about here, and it's been done elsewhere, is when you put it in an airplane.
Yes.
And you fly it over an area. You send down, millions of pulses of the laser. Most, if you're flying over a forest, most of it's going to hit the trees and bounce back, and you'll get a map of the top of the canopy, right? But some are going to make it all the way to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to bounce back. And it may only be one of 1,000 or one of 10,000. But when you're putting down millions of pulses, it's enough.
Yes.
And using, some sort of algorithm, you can probably look at some sort of, binomial reading and figure out where the top of the canopy, what's bouncing off the trees versus what's bouncing off the ground.
Right.
And so you can effectively remove the trees. And they've done this many places. Here in Kentucky, they've done almost the entire state for flood control purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But archaeologists are going through that data and finding all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
It's very easy. It's very intuitive. You don't need to be any kind of specialist. Anybody can use, the LiDAR images to find things. It's sort of like an aerial photograph.
Yeah.
And so that's what was done in Honduras in this same area. And and they found some sites, of course.
And so they found these sites, and they're like,
you just stop there.
Yeah.
And then they found some sites.
We found Ciudad Blanca, and you and not just you, a number of other archaeologists initially were like, well, wait a minute. And what was you said you worked with this, and you do underwater archaeology, work with scanning 3D underwater, using structured light. You've talked about using LiDAR. So you're definitely not anti using tech, even though you have kind of slogged through there on mule or on foot or on, busted ass truck and all that. But, so what was the initial issue with them saying, aha, there's a big thing down there that must be Ciudad Blanca?
Well, I think the initial issue were these things in the Honduran paper that said, we found the White City. And, it's like, well, one of the things I always ask anybody that would claim that is, okay, if you found the White City, first of all, which version of the myth are you using, and what are the criteria?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Like, how did they know?
That identified as the White City. And of course, there are no criteria in anything. It's sort of like the legend of the blue truck or whatever, You can go out and you can find one. You're like, holy shit, there's a blue truck, It's just meaningless. So that was the first part. And so, I wrote these guys, and these are people that I knew. Some of them I knew back from the 90s, that had been looking for this lost city. And, I would get phone calls from people, maybe not these guys, but, others that were like, we're launching an expedition to search for the lost city. We want
I got an email like that in early grad school. And before I met you, actually, that's how I first heard about it.
Yeah. And, and it'd be like, we'll pay you handsomely. And all this B-movie language, and it's like...
Well, it's because you're living a B-movie if you go join that dig.
Well, yeah, and that's, of course, part of the issue. And that's part of the goal, right? The goal of this is not to learn about the past. It's to be the hero of the B-movie.
Right. Exactly.
And
back to the machete and the wall of the Annas, yeah.
Yeah, and you can tell from the descriptions. One of the things that we do, and people do, is create images of others and other places that serve to define you. And one of the things, I've taught many classes where I looked at explorers and adventurers and travel writing, and how people describe places. And, if you want to make yourself look heroic and tough, it's the impenetrable jungle.
Right.
If you want to be a little more realistic, it's like it's a forest. It's not that different than here. It's impenetrable in like an RV, but you can walk through it just fine. I mean, little kids live there. Let's keep that in mind. This is not like some heroic environment that you've conquered,
Yeah, and sometimes the language in some of this press will say, like, the animals here are like super tame because they've never seen a human before, and you're like, humans have been wandering down this area for 20,000 years.
Well, and I don't know why that would make the animals tame, but
who knows?
Yeah, because how animals love unexpected shit,
exactly.
Hey,
look, a thing I don't know what that is. Maybe I should kill it. Yeah, that's more my experience.
I don't know.
With
I don't know for sure that that's going to kill me, so I'm not going to react.
Right.
That's not really the wild animal way. But there's so many problems with this stuff. But
hang on, those crocodiles left you alone, so that's proof.
Well, there you go.
But so they're going in there, and so So last year, a group that was working with National Geographic did go, and they actually did what was called, well, I don't know if I'd call this ground truthing, the idea of like, oh, we saw this thing with another technique, now let's go see what's there. And they went and did that, and that's where the pictures of the metates and the carved stones all started to emerge. And of course, unsurprisingly, this was all part of the eventual plan of putting a TV show. And they did. They put like an hour-long show on Nat Geo channel in, I think, October, because it actually came out while I was teaching, and I showed the clip with the blue painted folks, hiding in the forest, not unlike Fern Gully, in my class, and to much amusement.
Was that a staged scene?
Well, that was a reenactment. Yeah. That was like one of those, like, I don't know if they even filmed it there.
A reenactment of what? I don't know.
Exactly. Yes.
Having spent a big chunk of time out there,
it's really just an enactment.
I've not seen the blue people.
Yeah. No.
Now, before we go on, it was my understanding.
If you drink certain vines, you see the blurring people, but that's a whole different other problem.
So it was my understanding that when all this LiDAR stuff came out, because I remember when it did its first set of rounds, we already knew where most of those sites that they claimed that they had discovered were, didn't we?
Well, I don't know. They haven't really released it, but I think that those are not ones that I've recorded. Now,
do they look like ones you've recorded, though?
Well, yeah, they're exactly like all of the. Yeah. No, it's like they found some more decent sized sites. They don't appear to be as big as the biggest ones, but they appear to be sort of the next tier, maybe.
Okay.
And all of this is important. All of that has value. What they've done has value. It's unfortunate that it gets couched in these ways that obscure that value.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this on the show. We did and this is not to directly compare it, but I think there's some comparisons. We did a show where we talked about Roswell, the whole UFO crash thing, and there was an archaeological dig. They basically did a CRM dig. They hired the CRM firm that's associated with the University of New Mexico, and they did a solid phase 2 dig. And they ultimately concluded there's nothing there. This thing we thought, that's not. But if you watch the show and you read their report, when the TV cameras are out there, and I don't even think it was like an on purpose for the archaeology, I don't think this at all, but like you could just immediately tell that the TV cameras and the money and all of that just brought this sensationalism with it. And people stopped being as critical. And like the chief archaeologist, like on TV, and I don't think he was acting. I think he just got more excited about all this. And then when he came time to write the report, he's like, "Oh, actually, it's not really anything." I went back and I reanalyzed it, and it's like it's this, and this, and this is this, and it was very solid. But that was not what was happening when the media folks were around.
Yeah, and I'm completely sympathetic to that. We've all been there. To some degree. But, there are counterpoints to that. And one I would point to was the documentary I did in 2001 with the BBC with Ewan McGregor. Now, this was clearly...
wait. We're talking in the same area.
You got to meet Ewan McGregor?
I went through the jungle for 2 weeks with Ewan McGregor.
Oh, my God, that's awesome.
And then we came back and we went... to the disco and stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he is a wonderful person. Really, all those people were just wonderful. But if you were to go back and look at that, and it's on YouTube, it's called "Trips Money Can't Buy" with Ewan McGregor, and it is so good. It's so funny. And I'm really, really thankful that this was put in there now. At the very beginning of it, they're interviewing me about, the archaeological sites we're going to see. And I say, these are not sites I've discovered. These are sites that these guys have brought me to see, and I'm able to record them.
Right.
And, that's a very different approach. And I think that part of the thing that angered so many scholars about the recent Nat Geo stuff was this implicit or explicit in some cases statements that this was, unknown. We found it. We're the discoverers. All of this, which any of us that work out there know is just incredibly unlikely. Now I cannot prove that it's not there, but it would be like going into a forest here in Kentucky and, claiming you found something that no one had ever seen and then asking for proof that someone had seen it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sure I can provide that, but
there's people all around. And I want to make one other thing clear. We've been talking about this National Geographic because you've been involved in this. You are, if I remember correctly, a National Geographic explorer. You've worked with them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is not like some kind of, whatever. I mean, you have a history with them. So it's I just want to make that very, very, very specific.
I'm a National Geographic explorer, whatever that means.
Exactly.
And,
yes.
I have a bio page.
Yes.
There, which periodically throughout all this, I would go back and see if it was still there, and it still is.
Yeah.
But it's the thing I think to remember about this new project is that they used a technology that's incredibly valuable. They found stuff that could increase our understanding of what went on out in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the conflict and the critique, could just be avoided by avoiding certain types of language and all that. One of the things that most archaeologists, I hope, are very concerned about is anything that will look like you're being possessive of an area.
Yeah.
Like I'm not from the Mosquito Coast. I worked there. I did, I building on what people done in the past, I did something.
Yeah.
People in the future will come and build on that. And in fact, I've been part of those people. I was on Carrie Dennett's, a committee at Trent when she did her master's thesis on some of the pottery from out there.
I just was reading that for something else recently. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, I believe most everybody involved would love for there to be a next generation of people involved in this because, as you mentioned before, I've largely moved on to underwater archaeology and I just spent too much of my life in the jungle carrying heavy packs and so that's I am
ready for some weightlessness.
That's not my thing anymore.
No, but the reason I think you keep getting dragged back in addition to being a good storyteller, is that, you've done the work there, you've been in there, what's going on there. And I think that's one of the things. And you mentioned a number of scholars, and the background there is that a number of Honduran and international scholars, and I have to, for full disclosure, say I am one of them, signed a letter basically pointing out some of these problems and sensationalism, the sort of, the local people can't know any about this and nobody knows about these, when these things just doesn't seem very accurate from our perspective. And that it's the reason you keep getting asked is because you've published your work, it's out there, anybody can look at it, you admit the debts that you have intellectually and scientifically, and you've clearly worked with outsiders. And as you pointed out, one of the things you've made a point of from your dissertation on is like, I'm learning this from the people that came before me as archaeologists. I'm also learning this from the people that came before me that live here. And you said you've talked about lost cities and how a lot of it's about trying to make, the people telling lost city stories are heroes. And we've talked about this on the show with other kinds of alternative archaeology sort of tropes and narratives. It is all about the folks. Like, it's all about them and them being the hero of this radical tale that they're bringing back.
Well,
and frankly, that's boring. That's tiring.
It's a discoverer trope. I've given a number of talks, that I've titled things like, heteronormative fantasies and the lost city and things that, make clear, when one of the things that was advertised, for instance, was they had the ex-SAS Special Forces guys from England that were, they're machete men.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a country of people that grow up using machetes.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that, first of all, those guys aren't as good as a machete as I am, probably. And any 10-year-old in Honduras is way better.
Yeah.
And it's like, what in God's name are you doing bringing anybody else in to use a machete? And of course, the way that that's interpreted is that, the special forces part of it, increases this sense of danger, and it's a dangerous place. Yeah. My wife grew up there running around barefoot in the forest. There's
so what you're saying is your
everywhere.
wife is a secret SAS agent.
My wife.
I think he's implying she could kick their asses.
My wife is a super badass. Everybody knows that. But all of that's a problem. And one of the things I think that upset me so much about all of this stuff when it first came out was the implicit and explicit denial of local knowledge related to this stuff, because
Exactly.
I know how much I owe to the Pesh.
Yeah.
And it just makes me mad.
Yeah.
It's like you didn't spend the time there. You don't know.
Well, you have lasers. You don't need to do that.
Exactly. And the other thing is, and this is a paper I've been working on with some folks from Berkeley that deal with like the male gaze and all of these things that ultimately sort of disempower other groups and stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that in some ways LiDAR is like the ultimate gaze. Everything is reduced to the visual.
Oh yeah.
There is no other sensory input. You have an understanding of this area from something that is completely visual.
Yeah.
You have not been there. You haven't walked from A to B. You don't know what it's like. You haven't lived with those folks. You haven't traveled with them. You haven't talked to them. And that sort of lack of context is against everything that anthropologists, archaeologists try to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a useful tool. A camera is a useful tool. A video recorder is a useful tool. But at the same time, as you're saying, and again, you're no Luddite on this. You're using these same kinds of technologies in your own work, but it's a tool. It is not. And this is one of these things I find there are two tropes that are colliding here. One is the classic explorer trope, but the other one is this sort of new technology will disrupt what has come before. It's like if we do this next we could put Uber in the Mosquitia. I mean, it is kind of that same.
I don't know, man. Uber would probably be really nice out there. Then you wouldn't have to hike so far. You can just
that's true.
Uber your car and just wait.
If you could actually make that happen.
It could happen.
Little mules with mustaches.
I was saying Uber mule.
Oh, that would be awesome.
But the one of the things that is you're right, exactly. Like I use all sorts of high technology and new technology, and I also am a great fan of things that are written for the public, things that are non-academic. As evidenced by the Ewan McGregor thing, by Jungle Land, and
face it, you just wanted to go hang out with Ian McGregor.
Well, that's just understandable.
He was very cool. But there's just lots of issues surrounding sort of the lack of acknowledgement and the lack of local knowledge and really the lack of contextualization. And these are the sorts of things that you need to understand. Just like when we use sonar underwater, or you use LiDAR here, or you use maps, or you use aerial photographs. Those are all incredibly important tools that we should use. But we also need to understand the ways in which those artificially create a reality.
Yeah, they are representations. That's all they are.
Representations of something. And,
Well, Chris, this has been fantastic, and you've hit on a lot of the kinds of points that we've been talking about on the show, but I brought up some new ones and talked about stuff that, like, I haven't done. I'm pretty sure Sarah hasn't done.
Yeah, that was great.
I've not fought a crocodile. That's not in my repertoire. I fought geckos. That's different, but they're lizards.
Yeah, but
reptiles.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've not actually fought a crocodile.
You have now, because that story is going to be a thing.
Though, Chris, if you claim you fought a crocodile,
it wasn't
a TV show. They'll give you a TV show. Just saying.
It wasn't really a fight.
Oh!
Well done.
It's just. I just.
Well done.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
It just rolled
fair.
over.
I mean, I don't know.
He
He was distracted.
He was distracted.
Perhaps.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for this. This has been awesome, and I will do the very slightly ubiquitous plug. If you want to read more about this, we have a chapter actually with Chris Begley in the volume I helped edit, Lost City Found Pyramid, coming out in September, where he talks about some of these same things. And unlike where we did here, he also gets some into. By the way, we actually learned some stuff about the pre-Columbian past there. You might be interested in that too, but he does talk about some of the core concepts here, and it's a very cool article that he's given us. So if that's it, I think we're pretty much wrapped up right around about time.
Yeah. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. And
well, thanks for inviting me. I love talking about this stuff.
All right, no problem. I'm sure we'll probably have you back on again later on. So
you are actually heading down not to Honduras but to Central America, and have a good trip. And by the time people hear this, you'll have been underwater doing all kinds of high-tech laser scanning and finding things that are cool out about the past.
Hopefully, yes, that's right. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Rate your trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeology Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher, and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archyfantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archyfantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at ArchyFantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.